All right, let's get into the recession fears. We talked about this briefly yesterday. The yield curve has gone inverse, or was briefly. It doesn't seem to have maintained. 75% of economists surveyed think that we'll be in a recession by 2021. I don't know. It's a very weird time because in the past, generally the news media was relentless about denying that we're in a recession because so much of the money was being made on the run up to the stock market, and so many people were making money off of that. Everywhere you turned on television news, it was all stock market updates.
Yeah, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy too, right?
Well, they think it does, but I'm not convinced that it does. But they think it does, and to a certain extent, like the yield curve being inverse, or inverse yield curve, is a function of what investors perceive as what they perceive is things are going. But, we don't know if they are just imagining it or they're looking at signs that tell them. But the White House is looking at different policies in which to deal with it. And we're in sort of a bad situation to deal with a recession. It's so bad that Donald Trump is even having to make excuses for his top economist who he sent out yesterday. You'll recall that we were observing, we were noticing that there were certain characteristics that Larry Kudlow was displaying when he was on TV.
Like optimism.
Big optimistic, Chuck that.
And possibly stroke. But I'm not clear what it was. But somebody said to Donald Trump, apparently, there were reports that maybe Larry Kudlow was drunk on TV yesterday.
Hey, Sam Seder, you ever write a piece called Sex in the Country?
There's reporting in CNN that Larry Kudlow may be leaving at some point.
Well, I hope not. I love Larry Kudlow. I think he's done a fantastic job. He has been going through health problems, as you know. But I watched him this morning. He was terrific. I think Larry's a fantastic guy, but I haven't heard that at all.
No. Here we go. We're about a day or two away from Larry Kudlow, I think, being fired.
Oh, even a day, not even a week.
I like how Trump's main judgment of his performance is how well he does on the TV shows.
Yeah, it's on the TV show. He's doing fine. I mean, aside from the major health problems. So they are contemplating cutting the payroll tax. Payroll tax, as you know, funds Social Security and Medicare. You pay about, I think it's 6.2% out of your paycheck. Your employer pays 6.2% on the other side, on top of your paycheck. And this, you are subject to the payroll taxes up to about $132,000, I think it is now. Aside from the fact that we should have the cap, should be blown out. Some people call for a donut hole, fine, whatever, but we're just capturing far less of the nation's income that way. Nevertheless, there have been deliberations in the White House, according to the Washington Post. Even though deliberations about the payroll tax cut were held Monday, the White House released a statement disputing the idea was actively under consideration. Business spending, apparently, in the economy has pulled back. RV sales are down, whatever that means. Well, there's some people have. Everybody has a different thing that they think is an indication of an economy going south. The last time the payroll tax was cut was in 2011 and 2012 under the Obama administration. This was in the time of a deep recession that had followed in the wake of the financial crisis. Frankly, I was against it then. I'm against it now. The difference, I would imagine, we don't know any of the details of how the Trump administration would do it. I'm sure it would be done in a much more problematic way. During 2011 and 2012, the payroll tax was dropped from 6.2% to 4.2%. The idea was to encourage spending. Now, a lot of people think it didn't work because people didn't notice. George Bush sent a check to everybody, which probably amounted to less money, but everybody knew it was a check, and so they went out and spent that extra money as opposed to doing whatever, not being aware that they had the extra money. Although I haven't seen any data on that. I just remember contemporaneously that was something that people would talk about. The cut, when it was imposed, had an automatic sunset provision, and by 2013, it was back up to 6.2%. Why is this important? Because the payroll tax funds Social Security and Medicare. Now, under the Obama administration, because there was so much blowback from progressives who said you cannot cut the Social Security tax because you're going to underfund the Social Security trust fund and the system itself broadly. And this is going to be an excuse to cut later on. So what they did is they cut the taxes on Social Security and the payroll, but they made up for that difference in the general fund, and it just got added to the deficit. I don't think that Donald Trump is going to do it that way. I think Mick Mulvaney is going to see this as an opportunity to starve Social Security from resources, and which will ultimately be an argument to cut Social Security benefits. It's highly problematic. It's also, the other problem that we have is there's no opportunity to deal with a recession. Or let me put it another way. There's a limited opportunity to deal with a recession because the way that you deal with a recession is to cut interest rates. But at this point, our interest rates are around 2.25% or something to that effect. I'm not 100% sure, but they're low. And when they're low, it means that you don't have room to lower them. There is no magic number. It's all relative on some level. So there's only so much cash you can inject into the economy through monetary policy at this point because interest rates are just not that high to begin with. The other problem is, of course, is that these people are not going to spend. They're going to cut taxes. They know they can't cut taxes for rich people anymore. And we know that as far as tax cuts go, the only ones that are effective are for middle-class people in terms of juicing the economy. And even then, it's not the most efficient way. The most efficient way is to spend, is to actually put money in people's pockets, and you could direct where it goes. The problem with the Trump tax cuts, not just from a wealth inequality standpoint, not just in terms of a plutonomy and then a plutocracy standpoint, were that giving money to rich people does not help the economy. Giving money to people living in poverty, giving money to people living paycheck to paycheck, giving money to people who barely save any money, that helps the economy because they turn around and they spend those dollars. But when you give money to rich people, it's not like they have new things to buy. They just use that money to create more money. They buy stocks. They inject capital maybe into some companies, but there's no efficiency involved in that. So there's just not the same opportunities to deal with a recession if we do hit one. Donald Trump is just trying to figure out a way right now to punt this into 2021. Either he'll be president for a second term, he'll escape prosecution. If he's fortunate, he'll die in office. Or it'll be a Democrat that takes the hit on the economy. And believe me, it'll be a disaster. The way they'll go after the Democrat, whoever it is, it'll be a disaster. They will say, you have no money. People in Congress, in the Senate, They will say, we have no money to do these plans. We have no money to do this. We have no money to do that. It's a real concern. But it's a very weird media time, too, because I just don't recall, and I've only lived through, 3 or 4 recessions as an adult, maybe even less. I don't recall this perspective by the media, one where they're not in full-on denial. But
Man, if Bernie or maybe Warren isn't president when the recession hits, it's going to be so much worse.
I think it's going to be, I don't know. I mean, I think it depends on what you mean by worse.
Like, they're the only ones who would do what they need to do in order to help us out of it.
The problem is, the question is going to be, can they get the Senate and the House to do what needs to be done? There's no president who's going to be able to do it alone. There's just not. And they're going to need the Senate and the House. So I don't know. There may be, I don't know. I could come up with 5 different scenarios. I don't know if there's a way to tell. I think you go with the president you want to have and deal with it. But it's not inconceivable to me that a Senate would be hostile to Bernie Sanders and try and clip them more than Joe Biden will come in and be like, I'll give you a huge tax cut again, or whatever it is. I don't know. But it's going to be ugly. And just in case that there's a desire to make it even uglier, the FDIC board apparently is voting this morning, and maybe they've already voted. They're going to roll back part of the Volcker rule, which basically prohibited banks largely from placing their own bets. They could do some things that were sort of more like best practices, certain hedges, certain currency purchases, if it was, to protect the assets of the bank. But they no longer were able to use deposits and to do their own sort of hedge funds, and basically just gambling with other people's money. And now they're going to have basically more latitude to do that. This was a big problem back in 2008, but that was so long ago. Who could remember? Who's around to remember such things? Basically, it uses the banks as, or I should say, the depositors as a backstop. We'll use their money that's in our bank accounts, not just for loaning out in, safe, bland, vanilla loans, but now we'll also get in there and go to the roulette table. It's all FDIC insured. So the taxpayers will just have to pay for it if we blow it. I mean, that's basically where we're at. This is a rule that went into effect 4 years ago. That's a long time. You get a little bored of those things after a while. So that's where we are in terms of the economy. And of course, unleashing the banks right now is a little bit of seems a little bit terrifying and irresponsible, but
It'll be fine.
Everything's going to be fine.
Don't worry about it.
Let's just get the Fed rates down to about 0.25.
Records all over the place.